Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We have a special edition of DevOps Unbound called a Roundtable, where we have a live engagement with our panel. I'm great to be here with my co-host, Austin Parker. Welcome, Austin.
Howdy.
As always, great to be good at doing this with you. DevOps Unbound, I'm sorry, the SRE show is a show that we talk about SRE topics, whether it's challenges we've had looking to the future, lessons learned, new topics, whatever it may be. So we have a really great topic kind of reflecting back on what we might have picked up and learned about 2022 that informs us about SRE's future. So we can talk about kind of a little bit of the past and looking forward. Today's roundtable is sponsored by Lightstep, great company with great products and technology in the observability space and incident management, and also a huge contributor leader in the open telemetry space. And Austin, you of course play a big role in that too. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
As always. Well, by the way, we are recording today's roundtable, and we will. Everyone that's registered will get an email with a link to that recording. And we are also giving away 4 gift cards, so hang around towards the end, and we announce who our winners are for that. So our topic is what 2022 taught us about SRE's future. So we'll get into that in just a moment. Let's start first by introducing ourselves. I didn't mention I'm Mitch Ashley. I'm CTO with Techstrong Group, who helps put on this roundtable. I also work with our analyst firm, Techstrong Research. Austin, you introduce yourself, and then we'll let the rest of the panel do that too.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Austin Parker. I am the head of developer relations at Lightstep, and done a lot of other stuff in my career. But these days, I'm working on SRE things. What's important to observability. I help maintain the open telemetry project and do a bunch of other stuff. So coming to you from sunny upstate New York. It's actually not sunny at all. It's very snowy today. But let's throw it over to my wonderful friend and colleague, Adriana. Introduce yourself.
Hey, my name's Adriana Villela. I work with Austin as a senior developer advocate at Lightstep. I have a background in software engineering, spent many, many years doing Java. Found my way into DevOps a few years back and slowly made my way into SRE observability, managed a platform team and an observability team for a year, and now I'm a developer advocate doing what I love, which is digging into tech and writing about it.
Jump in, whoever wants to go next.
3, 2, 1, Anna.
Sweet. Hi there. I'm calling in from the Bay Area, California today. I also sit on the Lightstep team. I currently work as a staff developer advocate, mostly focusing on how observability plays the role into the reliability space. Prior to joining Lightstep, I spent 4 years at Gremlin doing chaos engineering. And prior to that, I did site reliability engineering at Uber, focusing on chaos engineering and building cloud infrastructure tooling. And prior to that, my chops come from being one of those devs that focused a lot on front end and back end technologies and just kind of didn't necessarily know how things were running in production. So it was a pretty fun experience to dive straight into SRE and be like, wait, what are systems? What are operations? How do we actually make sure they stay reliable? And I'll pass it on over to Chad.
Thanks. Chad Bowden, Chief Engineer for DevOps at Boeing. Worked at Boeing and commercial companies over my career, primarily a Java developer. So shout out to Adriana for her Java days as well. I'm currently working to create a common software development environment and factory across Boeing to keep all of the tens of thousands of engineers there having a fast and efficient way to build their software. And over to Casey. You're the last one, Casey.
All right. Yeah. My name is Casey Tesarek. I'm located in Toronto. I started my career at IBM in the mid-90s. I was working in different areas of DB2, from DB2 to support to customer projects, resolving critical situations all over Europe, and also actually the rest of the world. And I also worked in as an engine developer in Toronto, IBM Toronto lab, and basically specialized in high availability, disaster recovery, and performance and tuning. But after almost 2 decades at IBM, I switched towards different topics. And so in the past 8 years, I worked as a site reliability engineer, also looked a bit and worked as a chaos engineer. Although like at that time, chaos engineering was still like in the beginning. And a lot has happened since then, which is really great. And the last 3 years, I also worked more with observability and open telemetry, collector gateway, and everything that has to do with site reliability engineering and observability.
Now, harken back to Java days, harken back to Chris Date and DB2 days, and lots of stuff everybody's done. It's probably connect a lot of dots here. Speaking of that, Austin, I was reflecting back. We did a live episode at KubeCon in Detroit. By the way, you can check that out on techstrongtv.com. We definitely recommend it. It's a great conversation. Several of us were here for that. And we're reflecting back of how much progress had been, how many things had happened that we hoped would happen in the observability space, SRE space, between pre-pandemic and kind of in 2022. And I think we're all pleasantly maybe surprised or confirmation that some really good things have happened. It was a great conversation. We're kind of reflecting back on a few of those things and also looking forward. Love to get to your thoughts to start out the conversation on that.
Yeah, I think it's been, a very interesting year, right? If you think about the pace of innovation or the pace of adoption, maybe I should say, rather than the pace of innovation, because quite a few of the things that we're doing in terms of site reliability engineering right now, and quite a few of the things we're doing in terms of DevOps and observability and so on and so forth, yes, they're very innovative, but in a lot of cases, what I have seen is this movement from taking things out of silos and taking things and sort of bringing them together and unifying a lot of topics or a lot of practices that maybe we had seen sort of implemented individually. And now we're recognizing like, oh, this is actually part of some greater whole, right? So instead of SRE being this kind of highly specialized and specific thing, we've taken sort of the lessons that we've learned and figured out how to adapt them to other organizations, right? So it's not just something that you need at like a planet scale, or you can do this in a bunch of different environments, like to Chad's point, right? You can do this at Boeing, where you have different challenges than you would have at a Google or at a Uber or wherever else, or that you can do at a bank where you have different sort of types of systems and different designs and different regulations and so on and so forth. So I think that to me is really one of the big bases of this, is that we're taking this stuff that used to be very tailored and figuring out how to make it more broadly applicable. And I'm wondering if anyone else in the panel feels that way, or if what you think might be, like, was there a contributing factor to that? Was there something that being stuck inside for 2 years made us realize, like, oh, we have to do it this way?
Yeah, I think observability's been huge, and we've seen the massive adoption of it over the last couple of years. And I mean, you go to KubeCon and reInvent, and you see lots and lots of progress being made in the observability realm. And as we've moved to a heavy work from home environment, observability has been really key there, right? Because you got a lot of people on your systems, and so you need to be able to see, what are the performance of these systems, and things break and things are going down. So observability has been very helpful in helping identify what is down or what's about to go down, and trying to improve on some of those items.
I think one of the things I also shared at the KubeCon chat that we did in person was kind of like the growth of the open source projects, like in the sense, or and vendors, that now we have a lot more open source projects that are talking about reliability and making sure that our day 0 to day 2 operations are going well. And at the same time, we're also seeing a lot more companies being built on top of these open source vendors. So now we're actually able to go into the private sector and the public sector with similar solutions. Yes, there are going to be different implementations and use cases, but a lot more folks have similar language and stories and guidelines on how they can actually be effective to meet their reliability goals.
Yeah, the open source piece is interesting because one of the things that I was talking to someone at KubeCon about this, right? Where they had spent the last 5 years really taking their internal platforms and saying we're going all in on Kubernetes, right? So we're going to build our internal developer experience, or our application orchestration will be built on Kubernetes. It might not be pure Kubernetes, it might be the sort of melange of stuff, but building on this sort of open source API at least gives us a standard way to pull in tooling, pull in other things, and that lets us, to kind of Chad's point before we started, that lets us build things where we can just kind of give it to developers and say like, hey, here's where you go, here's where you start to get going. And SRE, I think, has been a big part of helping drive that push to standardize.
Yeah, it feels like we're finally at the point where we're honoring SRE by codifying the things that should have been codified. And it's nice to see that there's a lot of stuff out there about providing self-service for teams around SRE, because let's face it, we don't want to keep waiting for some team to stand up something that we could do ourselves, and it's painful and we got jobs to do. So that's been kind of nice to see.
Does this just mean that SREs made people like engineering job a lot more antsy, that we're just like, can we get it now? Because I know how to build it. And if security doesn't let me, I'm going to go do it my own way. Which actually, that was actually something Adriana and I were talking about earlier this week on kind of codifying stuff. We were recording a podcast with someone that works in security engineering, and we were talking about how there is also more people doing policy as code. So we're not necessarily just looking at reliability standards that we're actually codifying, but we're looking a little bit more of what else does reliability really need to be reliable, and security is also just goes hand in hand.
Yeah, and I also think that we finally came to a point where more people understand what actually SRE means. In the beginning, it was kind of a very murky territory. Nobody really knew what site reliability engineers are. And I think maybe I'm wrong, but I think I have the feeling that the need for site reliability engineers came along when Agile and microservices came more into place and into play. Because in the beginning, when you had waterfall model, okay, agreed. We always had too less time allocated for testing, but still there was, I think, more well-defined testing plans available than there were now when Agile came to play. And Agile is a good idea, but you have to think about how to work that properly. So everything needs to be in place. You have to have a perfect pipeline. You have to have your tests, and everything must be flawless. Unfortunately, in many companies, that's not the case. They only pick bits and pieces, and in the end, it's falling apart. And so at that point, then you started to have site reliability engineers that tried to keep everything together. But on the other side, in many companies, SREs are nothing more than glorified troubleshooters. So it's I think a lot have happened like within the last 2 years, especially also when more stuff came around with observability, open telemetry, and I think it's a good development.
See, it's interesting that you bring up the waterfall agile thing, right? Because I have a somewhat unpopular opinion that SRE, that all of these things that like, agile versus waterfall, DevOps, and now SRE is all sort of like reactions against people coming in and trying to like sell you something. So, waterfall or agile was like the response of like, oh, developers need to have more of a say in what they're doing. Jenkins management practices, and then agile got sort of co-opted, right? Now you have like the agile landscape, and you have Scrum Master, DX, Unlock, or whatever. I don't know. Like, you can go pay someone to tell you that you know how to do agile, which seems like maybe an anti-pattern for what agile is supposed to be. And then DevOps was this brilliant idea of like, well, maybe developers should be responsible for the code they write, right? And now you can go and you can buy a DevOps platform. You can buy managed DevOps, and you can do all this stuff with DevOps as like a product, as a commodity. And SRE is the like, okay, no, it's actually about culture, right? It's actually about putting engineering discipline into operating software. And that you can sort of see now is starting to also be co-opted, right? And you're starting to see like products and tooling. It's like, oh no, this is like SRE solutions, right? You don't have to you don't have to do all this cultural stuff. You just need to pay us a bunch of money, and then you'll have SRE and you'll be great. So I'm kind of curious as to what the, we always have to be looking at like what's next after what's next, and I think that there's going to be something like that's going to be one of the things that we start to figure out in 2023. Like, what's the thing after SRE?
Didn't some people put thought leadership out on it like this Q3, Q4 of 2022 on what comes after SRE, or like if SRE was to go dead?
Yeah, I feel like I've seen it. But I mean, if you think about it, it's like SRE is actually, I mean, like this has been a thing for what, 20 years almost? When you get down to brass tacks, like certainly Google has been doing it for quite a while internally. Like I remember, Uber had SRE teams. Like when did Uber start doing SRE? Like
they started in 2014, I believe. And they were following like the embedded SRE model a little bit more closer to the Facebook model, but we also had a lot of folks working in infrastructure from Google. So I remember being there when like the Google SRE book came out, and it was like just handed to every single team, like, here, this is what we're going to read, and this is where we go from here. Like what we've done is different than where the land that is coming up, which was like an interesting perspective, like looking back at it now.
Yeah. I think there's go on.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, like, as you pointed out, SRE has been around for a while. Will it necessarily, is there a thing after SRE? I think these things tend to evolve, so it'll continue to morph into something else as we continue to refine it. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sure the SRE of 20 years ago is not the same as the SRE of now, right? And will it ever go away? Not necessarily. It might just take a slightly different form, is what I would think.
Yeah, I think it will. I think it probably just is going to be ingrained as a mindset instead of like a particular job. I mean, before it became a thing, people still had reliable systems as a goal, and I think this is not going to change in the future either. Especially now that more and more companies are also using microservices, as I mentioned before. One of the problems I've noticed is that unfortunately, often there are no standards. So you have like different groups who build like different microservices and all do different things, and like the input and output, the interfaces they're not standardized. Everybody's doing their own stuff. So it's becoming more and more complicated to actually figuring out what is going on. And I think observability is definitely one of the things that can help us a lot in that regard, and also makes it more easy to create reliable systems in the end.
That's a really good point, Casey. I
Yeah.
think about reliability. We've measured uptime in the past, right? It's thinking of one of our big metrics. We think about it much differently now with SRE and SLOs and all the tools that we have. It's interesting to me because it feels like DevOps is supposed to have developers do all the operations, and of course, anybody doing development knew that probably wasn't going to happen. But what it's really done is elevated so many other roles, and what we used to be just operations now. SRE is a big element of that, kind of a specialty, and tools that go along with that instead of just alerting and reacting. And your job is to try to keep the dang thing up. No, you do a lot to engage with how to help make it more reliable, maybe even more resilient. So I think there's a lot of work left to be done.
So on that note, Mitch, who here is familiar with the Void report? Anyone? Yeah.
Nope.
So it's from it's sponsored by, or it's put together by Verica, Jelly.io, the Learning from Incidents people, right? And what it is they have compiled a public incident database, right? So organizations, when they have incidents, they go and submit them, and then they have compiled this into a report that you can go find if you search for Void report or go to Verica.io, I believe. And I'm not affiliated with this other than sort of, I think what they do is cool. So this is free plug. But what I think is super interesting is, and to a comment that was made in chat earlier, right, about SREs and unraveling organizational pitfalls and blind spots. I think the biggest thing that SRE has done in terms of like culture and organization is help orient people around better thinking about incidents, right? And better and really thinking about reliability and resiliency in a different way. Because I was talking to people earlier, I've talked to people in 2022, right, who have this extremely outmoded model of like, well, what makes reliable software? And their response was like, well, a reliable piece of software is one where there's no errors, right? There's no incidents. That you can build you can build a system that is safe because there's no incidents, because it's, you have reduced the error count to 0. It's just like, that's a stunningly not accurate view of how the world works, right? Like, there will always be incidents, there will always be errors, there will always be things outside of your control. And I think SRE is helping drive that realization in a lot of organizations, and that to me is one of the biggest roles of SRE, right? Like, that's the biggest value you can add, is like changing that way of thinking by understanding the organization and helping to sort of make those connections that need to happen across the organization to build that kind of thoughts.
One thing that I would add to that too is I think we're starting to see more attention being paid to empathy around incidents, where there's at least more awareness around the fact that we cannot let our SREs burn out, because otherwise who's going to be doing their jobs, right? So we have to make sure that there's a safe space for them to do their jobs, for failure to occur. I don't know if we're necessarily at the point of safe spaces in SRE being ubiquitous, but I feel like there's at least more conversation around that. And I think companies like Jelly do provide, are kickstarting that kind of conversation.
I think is that the biggest push that we need to continue doing is that of embracing failure and injecting failure. One, for the purpose that if we're not looking for those moments of uncomfortableness and possibly incidents, you are not necessarily innovating as an engineer and as a company. And that kind of goes against your engineering mindset. But at the same time, there are proper ways to do it where you're making sure that you have already like instrumented your systems so you can observe them, and that you go through like chaos engineering simulations so that you're actually like preparing for those possible failure scenarios that can actually happen. And like that's one way that you can kind of like slowly start walking to like that pushing tip edge of like, when is it that my system's actually going to fall over and like things can go bad, but like you're constantly preparing for it.
I think that's a very good point. Oh, sorry. Did I?
Oh no, I was actually you too, but like also I'm interested because Chad has been doing a lot of this stuff we've been talking about, right? Like as a day job, and I'm actually very curious what he's learned over the past 12 months, like trying to do this at Boeing.
Yeah, I mean, one of the primary objectives, like what you're talking about, Anna, with your chaos engineering and trying to make things break before they matter, right? The ultimate goal is to make kind of the whole system go away, right? Like as SREs, we kind of think the world revolves around us, but our job is to keep the developers successful and make the platform boring to them, right? That's one of the things that I think we've been kind of seeing with Kubernetes over the past year, as you've talked about, the migration to microservices, and Kubernetes is maybe starting to become boring. And that's a good thing, right? It's good that it's becoming boring for everybody, so that it just gets out of the way and allows developers to write their code, test their code, deploy their code, and provide business value for that. So that's been a big learning item, is to keep the eye on the developer.
Well, it definitely became more complicated to do all these tests. I mean, 20 years ago, you went in the data center, pulled a few plugs, either the power cable, or you thought, okay, what is it? Network cable, nice. Let's see if it still works. Try failover, active passive. But like these days, it's like really complicated. And I think chaos engineering is definitely helping with that, especially while chaos engineering is also geared towards doing that in the production environments to see how can we cope with that. And I think Netflix was like one of the first ones who actually did that in production and did it successfully. So I think this is something where it's more progressing towards too. Also, when it comes to integration tests, I mean, these days, I mean, yeah, microservices are supposed to be stateless, but I've seen in so many cases that's not really true. A lot of microservices are not stateless, which makes it even more complicated to figure out where issues are. And you have a lot of third-party APIs that also in the mix. And then you have all the different departments, they work on different projects and components, and you rather test in isolation because the entire system and integrated in everything else in a production environment is almost impossible these days. And I think that is where the SRE mindset comes to place as well.
Yeah. But to that point, Casey, like one of the things I like to tell people is that an important thing in like how SRE can help people conceptualize this is moving away from binary models of like success. So, which is really easy for us to get into. We think like, okay, well, there's only, that it works or it doesn't work. Like you were saying, you go into the data center, you pull the power and it's off. You pull the network cable and it's disconnected. It's up or down. Those are the only two options. But as we have these very complex systems, and I think we have these very complex interconnected systems, and yes, Kubernetes makes things very boring, but Kubernetes is an abstraction over like hellaciously complex software. What we need to do is we need to get our organizations and our teams learning to define like the acceptable range of outcomes, right? And learning to talk about SLOs as a way to sort of codify that range of acceptable outcomes. And once we can think about like, it's not just black or white, on or off, yes or no. It's like, actually there's this, from this point to this point is like, this is the okay-ish range. And maybe we have like a specific thing in the middle we want to hit. My favorite example of this was talking a couple years ago to people that were working on payment processors, and they were a fraud detection. They were kind of a fraud detection as a service type of thing, and their published SLA was what it was, and their circuit breaker was flip a coin, right? If they were going to fail their SLA on a individual request, they just said 50-50. It's fraud or it's not fraud, right? And that was an acceptable solution for them. Now, we could probably argue that maybe it shouldn't be, but at least that's a way of kind of considering like where are your actual limits in terms of system design and resiliency, and orienting the team's thinking around that, and orienting the business around that too, because ultimately that's a business decision, not a like technology decision, right? There's a lot of reasons that you could time out your SLA. And there's a lot of financial considerations around like timing out the SLA. That's not necessarily we have to make the best technical decision. We have to make the best decision for like the actual business itself. And I think one thing to consider as we move forward to 2023 and sort of how do we like to characterize this macroeconomic uncertainty, like the role of SRE in helping understand and optimize sort of the business is like from a financial perspective is going to become more important.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that's I mean we keep coming back to observability, but like you're talking about, right? It's not binary. There's a degraded service, and how degraded is it, and how does that affect your SLAs and SLOs? But observability, the complexity of the landscape, right? Where are things broken, and why are they broken, and why are they degrading, and trying to isolate where that is very, very challenging. And I think that's a big problem, big problem space for SREs, and a lot of that comes with experience, right? Just understanding the architecture and the deployment laydown of everything, and going through and figuring all of that stuff out. But you have to have tools to bring all of that stuff together, right? Your telemetry, logging, metrics, what's breaking and where. So the tools do matter, and I think that's been a great advancement that we've been seeing over the past couple of years with observability.
Yeah, and it's been nice to see, like, especially in open telemetry. Like I first got into open telemetry like a year ago, and to see it evolve as much as it has in the last year, like a lot of the different signals are pretty stable in open telemetry. And Austin, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it means that, I think all the major observability vendors are like all in on open telemetry. So with that kind of standardization, it puts us in a really good position. Like it puts organizations in a really good position to have to follow observability practices. So include those observability practices as part of their SRE practice, where it's not something that, maybe a year ago we could definitely start having that conversation, but I feel like 2022 and beyond, like it's definitely going to be something that's going to be like the ultimate tool in an organization's tool belt, right?
And I think that an SRE is like in the future of SRE is also going to develop standards for exactly observability and integrating and everything. For instance, if you just look into metrics names that many teams choose, well, they should be the same. Otherwise, like correlating data, it's going to be really, really complicated. And I know the backend can do a lot, but it can't match like completely different metric names.
Yeah, and taking us back to part of like what we're seeing coming up over the coming year, going to observability is eBPF, right? Where the additional information that's providing, and where observability is starting to move into some of the eBPF realm, and changes that are going to bring. I think that's going to be pretty exciting as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I could sit here and talk about observability for quite a while. I do want to actually. What do you guys want to talk about
in the Q&A?
Yeah, I do want to point out for the question from the Q&A about the person that's building on an SRE team. I'm actually going to point you to the several episodes of the SRE show on Techstrong. Mitch, where's that at? Because we've actually done like several episodes about this year. So you should go look those up. Same thing for the Agile team. Techstrong.tv. Yeah, if you look for the SRE show, we've done a few episodes on building out SRE teams, on going from like 1 to 0, 0 to 1, all that stuff. So definitely check those out. So I do want to talk a little bit about the observability stuff because it keeps coming up. I'm gonna be a contrarian here because I've had a lot of thoughts about this recently, and one thing that I think we have done a poor job of with observability is that we haven't done enough work on making it easy to use. Or we are still, or maybe a better way to phrase this, we continue to intermix telemetry concerns and observability concerns. So there's two, and these are actually two separate things. Like when we talk about open telemetry, we're actually really specific. We're talking very specifically about signals, about data, and data by itself is useless. We collect and generate way too much data. We generate like massive amounts of data just as an industry, and 99% of that data is usually worthless from an observability point of view. And what I would love to see us get to more as practitioners and as people that like care about this stuff is arguing for better sort of like, are you talking about observability or are you talking about telemetry? Because if you're talking about telemetry, then we really need to be making telemetry both easier to use, more ubiquitous, and easier for developers and sort of our internal customers to add. Like my classic example here is heck, everyone here has been a software engineer at some point. Did you take a class in college on learning how to log? Like, how do you learn this stuff, right? Like, you do a computer science program, you do whatever. Like, nobody teaches you how to like write a good application metric. No one teaches you how to write a good log or trace or whatever. These are telemetry concerns, not observability ones. The observability concerns are, okay, now I have all this data. Let me take that data and turn it into insights. Let me analyze it. Separate problems. Yep. We should treat them separately. Thoughts?
But wouldn't it be that it's just like lack of education of operational excellence of applications? Like take it a step above where it's like you don't really get taught how to put software to work for you and your customers. Mm-hmm. Like whether it's actually building reliable software or necessarily debugging or building good test cases or setting up telemetry observability.
I guess that's the question, right? What should SRE be responsible for here? I would argue that SRE should be responsible for observability, right? Like, yes. Your job as an SRE is to help shape and understand and deliver insights about the system as a whole and individual parts of it as needed. Developers' job should be building that telemetry. I shouldn't necessarily have to sit here as a developer. My job shouldn't necessarily be, I need to figure out how to understand the entire system. I should be able to, but I should know, and I should be taught and educated, how do I emit the data that needs to be emitted? How do I need to, build the telemetry that needs to be plugged into this analysis, this observability system in order to make my services observable, in order to make my part of the system observable. And that sort of relationship, of SREs being the observability, I don't want to say gatekeepers, but being the people that are helping push observability. Yeah, and maybe they are gatekeepers, right? But they need to be the people that are like setting the rules of the road and saying, this is the telemetry we need. And if you're not delivering that telemetry, then that's a you problem, not a me problem. Like, I need to teach you, I need to enable you. Or I need to make it easier for you. But yeah, we conflate these things. We turn the telemetry is not the observability. The telemetry is a part of it.
Yeah, well, I agree with you, and I would take it a step further and say, that yes, I agree that the SREs are the gatekeepers of observability and can provide guidance on what kind of telemetry to capture. I would even say testers can also provide that kind of gatekeeping by ensuring, because I mean, your system is observable if you don't need to keep adding more of those signals to your application, right? So that you've got all the information to be able to troubleshoot, right? And so that's where I think a testing team can come into play to help determine, okay, am I missing something? And so I think that combination of working with SREs and testers to identify like what signals are important. Yes, developers have a good start on putting those signals together, but then like they need that extra nudge, right, to make sure that they've captured all the things that needs to be captured.
Well, this only works if you really have any testers, because in many companies that does not happen.
True. All right. In my ideal La La Land, I would like to see this.
Yeah, and that's where that's an important part of like why the culture of DevOps was there, right? Because if developers don't experience the pain of not having the proper signals sent to be able to observe in whatever observability tool or logs, otherwise it's just coming through some third party. Well, I need more signals in your code that you're writing, and that becomes a back and forth game versus having the developers have some skin in the game there. And I won't say that all devs are going to be doing ops, but just still having that mindset I think is incredibly important for developers to have that.
There's even the idea of observability driven design, right? Building in to your software, right? How you design it for telemetry information, so it is even more helpful.
Yeah, and a lot of that comes with experience, right? With unless you've been bitten by it, you don't know to add that data, those signals into your software as you're developing it.
Yeah, I mean, but it is iterative, right? Like any kind of any development process is an iterative process where you're kind of figuring this stuff out. I think one thing that I would actually see as like a future, as something that's coming in 2023 and beyond, is right now the impact of SRE I feel like is more defined in very mature organizations. It's actually really difficult, I think, for SRE at sort of early stage or smaller orgs to have a huge impact, because they usually just end up firefighting all the time. They just become the ops person, but on the AWS console rather than sitting in a data center somewhere, right? But I do believe that over time, like one thing that we're going to start seeing is SRE beginning to have a greater impact on smaller orgs and being able to do things like set these rules of the road, and being able to, as platform tools become more sort of accessible and you have things that help you act as force multipliers for like a single person SRE team, then yeah, like we'll see that. A good example would be like automated, like static analysis for telemetry data. Good example, right? The SRE goes in and says like, hey, this is what we expect to see, and we're going to check it like every time we deploy. And if you're missing something, then that's a gate on the PR, or that's a gate on, like we're not gonna flip the canary flag off if we don't see the right telemetry data coming out of the system, or so on and so forth, right? And giving SREs the opportunity and sort of the ability to enforce that observability driven design through tooling is going to be really important.
Yeah, I really would like to see that more in the future. Observability driven design and development. In the beginning, when test driven development started, I really enjoyed and liked it, but I also saw that in many companies it's not really properly used. So I just hope that observability has more impact in that regard.
Certainly gets us talking together, right? You have to have that observability experience to do observability driven development or design.
That's true.
I want to ask about observability of things.
Observability of things. Okay. Wow.
I
just
would love to know more about what that's supposed to be.
Oh, okay. We're going to give some gift cards away here in just a moment. So one of the things I wanted to get us thinking about is in 2023, what our hopes are for hopes or dreams or expectations for SRE in this next year? Because, I mean, this has been a fascinating discussion. I appreciate the real depth that we've gotten into in such a short period of time. So maybe we can start rolling the conversation that way, Austin, if you want to maybe kick off with some ideas.
Yeah, my dreams for 2023, my hopes for SRE in 2023. I would like to think that we are going to see more growth, or SREs being less concerned with infrastructure in general, right? Like, I think right now SREs wind up kind of being, ops people by any other name in a lot of orgs. But as we see more people adopt serverless architectures, we see more people kind of adopting these fancier sort of managed tools, like managed database stuff, even like on-prem managed database stuff, right? Like, there's a lot of cool things happening where the toil of administering stuff is being replaced. And so I think that makes SREs less of a, like, YAML janitor and more of a, again, cooler stuff like, hey, let's set rules of the road for observability. Let's automate and scale out how we can ensure that we have observable systems and software. Casey.
Yeah. My hopes for the future are that SRE becomes really like a mindset and becomes part of the development culture. Same with observability. I want to see that SRE and observability is just something we learn being part of our development process. And if that's the case, at one point we're not going to need an SRE anymore that is going to put out all the fires because the developers already built reliable software. So, but that's just like maybe something I wish for. Yeah.
We can dream. We can dream.
Yeah. No, for sure.
Go ahead. Whoever wants to jump in next.
Did we get all the questions in the Q&A room? I know some people had some questions about thoughts on structuring their teams. Any thoughts on that? Structuring.
One of the things that Austin did is he mentioned the episode we did on building an SRE practice, if you will, in your organization. So I put in a link to that in the chat episode, so you can go watch, good 45 minutes on that topic, as well as all the episodes is pinned to the top of chat, so you can go see all the conversations about this. So
I think we've tried. We have a lot of stuff historically about that. So
some great content,
great conversations.
It really is. Who hasn't jumped in about 2023 yet? And your hopes and dreams for what you hope happens?
I agree with. I hope we end up making that SRE job less important, right? I think it'll go to a different name eventually. Maybe it doesn't happen next year. The tech's going to change. The tech stack is going to change. Is WebAssembly going to change things? It'll change what needs to happen, but there's still going to be problems and just different areas to look for those problems than doing it in Kubernetes. So it's constant learning, just like any tech job.
I can jump in. I think one of the main ones for me was kind of like thinking ahead of like standardization as code and not necessarily just looking at it from like the infrastructure perspective, but branching out more to like observability, dashboards, SLOs, workflows, kind of like leaning in a little bit more into GitOps with a lot more controls. And then also like with that in hand that you're kind of standardizing across the board in organization SLOs, really use those to lead reliability initiatives in organization and not necessarily just let it be aspirational, while like maintaining a culture of like learning and reflecting with your team and adjusting as needed.
Yeah, and I would add to that also, I think getting SRE to a point where, and I think we're starting to see that where people are realizing that no, we don't have to like take the literal Google Bible and follow that and do what suits our organization best. I think I would definitely like to see more of that. And the other thing, just piggybacking on what Anna was saying, is I think there's a lot of things that are done as part of an SRE workflow that I'm sure have been like, the wheel has been reinvented 5 million times over. And wouldn't it be nice to have a mechanism for SREs to share workflows with one another so that we're not always expending all this extra time reinventing something that has already been invented? And then my final thing would be, for observability to take more center stage as part of an SRE practice. And I think like we're definitely starting to see that. I'd love to see more of that, especially as open telemetry continues to grow and evolve, and observability vendors continue to grow and evolve alongside it.
I think like DevOps, SRE, we didn't stick to the book as the Bible, right? It's very adaptable because everybody is in a different place in their organization, and what the silos are, or what their strengths are, or how to bring it in and introduce it. And just like the tech stack is evolving so fast, right? You mentioned WebAssembly and of course our cloud native applications are continuing to ramp up, and that's all going to continue to evolve. And it seems like there's a great spirit, a great community around SRE as a practice to continually invest in and evolve. It isn't a fixed destination we're getting to. It's evolving along with the SDLC, like someone mentioned in the chat. It's evolving with their tech stack. I think that's super encouraging. Agree? Great. Well, let's wrap things up here. We've had a fantastic conversation. I put the gift card winners in the chat. Just to reiterate that, it's Gianova G, Sarah F, Krishna C, and Benjamin M. So folks here at Techstrong will reach out to you about getting a hold of those gift cards. Austin, any parting thoughts to wrap things up for this conversation?
It's been a heck of a year. I think it's the great thing about technology and about the software industry is it's all very dynamic, right? Like we're going to probably come back here a year from now and look back and be like, wow, that didn't really go. There's going to be something else that comes up, right? Like it's the future is very difficult to predict. And I do think the one thing that is going to stay true, though, is that we are going to continue to appreciate how important people are to software and how people are really at the heart of everything we're doing in this industry. So as we move into the holiday season and into the new year, I urge everyone, keep the people in your life, professionally or personally, close.
It is. It's all about people. And it still is, and it will be. Very good. Well, I'd love to thank the team at Lightstep for your sponsorship of the SRE show. We have another episode that's coming up in January that will be posted on techstrong.tv. So look for that. And as I mentioned, there's tons of good information in the past episodes. Super worth a listen to those as well. So Austin, thanks to you. Thanks to Anna and Adriana from the Lightstep team. Thanks to KC from Toronto.
Thanks for having me.
Adriana. And Chad from Boeing. It's been a fantastic conversation. So thanks to our audience for joining us today. You've been wonderful. We love all of the conversation and questions that you've contributed. You really helped shape and guide a lot of the conversation as you always do. So look for next episode or next roundtable coming up for the SRE show. So thanks for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you, panel. Thank you, Austin.
Bye, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.